If you're just now joining us, we're going to hold for a few seconds, let everybody file into if you can file in or whatever the word is for getting into a Zoom. And we'll get started in just a few moments while we awkwardly sit here and wait for you guys. 1 second. It's important too, if you have like notes, to kind of pretend like you're doing something like.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I'll enter some receipts in my budgeting spreadsheet.
Okay, yeah. I reach over here like I'm getting something. Yeah, okay.
Excellent.
All right. Hey, everybody. This is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books. We are so thrilled to have you here for our weekly virtual author event series, which we have been doing for the past 6 years, it feels like, every Monday and Thursday. And so thrilled to have you joining us. We love giving you something to look forward to, and it's something we can look forward to as well, having something on our calendar, something in our phone that we can put in there and say, hey, this is something fun to get excited about, and take a break from the new things that are going on in the world and just escape and have a good conversation. So thank you for joining us. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up. I don't want to go through the whole list, but I would encourage you to go to our website, magiccitybooks.com, and you can see the full list. I will say we do have a big event coming up on September 8th with the one and only Margaret Atwood, and that is a ticketed event, and I believe those tickets are selling quite quickly. And she's been kind enough actually to not just sign book plates for us, but we're actually going to get real signed books for you guys for that. So get on that. It's a pretty special opportunity. I'm not nervous at all about talking to Margaret Atwood, so don't ask. But
do you want to try out? Do you want to try out some of her questions on me?
Yeah,
this would be fun. I could role play.
Yeah, like I could ask you, what did you really base every single thing that happens in Handmaid's Tale on things that had been documented in the world up to that point? And you just say,
yes, I did.
One word answer. Just make it real awkward. One word answer. Yes, I did. Okay, thanks. All right, so as you can see, we are not talking to Margaret Atwood tonight. We are talking to our friend Molly Wizenberg, the author of the wonderful new memoir, The Fixed Stars. And if you don't know Molly's work, and I'm assuming many of you do, for joining us here, Molly has done lots of different things. She is the James Beard Award-winning writer behind the popular blog Orangeette, and we actually had a chance to host Molly for her first book. We decided over a decade ago in 2009, right when we were first starting Booksmart Tulsa, and we were just begging people to come do stuff with us, and she was kind enough to indulge us in those early years and do something fun with us. But since then, there's been a book between then and a whole lot of other stuff which we get to in this book. But I want to say a big welcome to Molly, and thank you for joining us.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I'm so glad. Well, so I had planned to come to Tulsa in person, and I'm so bummed that I can't be there in person. But
I guess we should say, for those who don't know, you're from Oklahoma. That's an important thing too, you know.
Yeah, I'm from Oklahoma City.
Yes.
Ash, can you take off Alice's collar? Sorry, we have a dog in the room with a collar on.
That's good. We like dogs. But yeah, you're from Oklahoma City, and of course, if this were a normal world, we'd be doing this in person, and you'd be doing kind of a mini Oklahoma book tour. You'd be in Oklahoma City and Tulsa and just hitting it up in the real world. But we're so glad to have you here for this new book. And I've been following your work for a long time, of course. And when I had read about the events that now make up the book, I believe, I kind of knew about it before the book came out because you had written about it and it had been kind of publicly talked about. I wondered if this would become a book at some point, because it just felt like kind of knowing the work that you've done and the writing that you do, that you would, mine your life for the stories that you have. I mean, and that's what you've done here, but you've kind of gone in a direction that, as we kind of dive into this, is obviously probably the most personal thing you've written, and certainly I would imagine it's difficult in some ways as well to kind of gather your thoughts and how to do all of this. So I guess I would like to begin, for those who don't know what the base story is kind of tell us what The Fixed Stars is about and why you wanted to write it.
Yeah, so this book, both the book itself and the actual experience that, happened in my life, they both start with a juror summons that I received in the spring of 2015. I got a juror summons to serve here at one of the courthouses in Seattle. And I was at the time 36 years old, and I had been married for almost a decade. I was a mother to a toddler, and I reported for jury duty and had this very disorienting experience of developing a truly crippling crush on a very masculine presenting female defense attorney, wearing a suit. And I had, up to that point, known myself to be straight. And this was very unlike any other crush that I might have had in adulthood. I felt consumed by it, and I felt a tremendous amount of shame, not only because of the circumstances of my life that made it such that that I felt like I was like living a secret life inside my head, thinking about this person, but also because I grew up during the height of the AIDS epidemic and had an uncle who was gay and died of AIDS when I was a child. And so my earliest understanding of sexual orientation, and particularly of what it meant to be gay, was based in this idea that I learned as a child, which is that you're born this way, and it's this idea that's been so foundational in the fight for LGBTQ rights. And so for me to, as a woman in her late 30s, to feel this sudden attraction to someone of my same gender, and to try to reconcile that with the fact that I thought that I knew myself pretty well. Like, I'd written 2 books exploring different aspects of my life at that point. And so I felt
being a wife and a mom and all these different things. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I felt this tremendous shame. Like, if I was born this way, did I ever really know myself at all? Have I been hiding from myself this whole time? Or, is it possible that something that's so very much at the core of our identity can change this much in adulthood? And so it really, I have always used writing as a tool for thinking. And so this book, I felt that I was going to have to sit down and explore some of these questions in writing if I was ever going to be able to sort of get them out of my head. So, yeah, I sat down to write this book to sort of explore this question of identity and change, and sort of what are the limits of what we think of as our self.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, toward the beginning of this period of your life, when you started to kind of have these realizations and you started to become a member of the LGBTQ community, were you embraced immediately by that community? Were you met with any skepticism as kind of a tourist of any kind? Kind of talk about how getting integrated into that community was like for you personally. I'm curious.
I mean, I think it's an ongoing thing. And I think that also within every, I tend to use the word queer. Within every queer community, there are so many different ways of being queer, and so many different pockets within that community. And so, my first sort of, I think that the most resistance that I encountered was sort of resistance that came from within me, from my own shame, my sense of, I was terrified of being seen as a voyeur or an interloper, or feeling like, I feel keenly aware of how many writers and activists like paved the way for me to have as easy an experience in coming out as I have had. And so I think that sense of perspective, though I'm grateful for it, also tripped me up a lot when I thought about starting to date or starting to like find a community for myself within like a non-straight world, because I think I saw myself as an interloper or as someone who had, you know, gotten to have like the social privilege of being straight or moving through the world as a straight person for most of my life, and now was like switching over like it was easy. And it was very challenging at first too, because of the person who I began dating right off the bat. She was in a very, I would say, like young activist, queer community, and that was very self-policing. And so I felt from the beginning very much like not queer enough. And that having a child also sort of set me apart in a way that was very uncomfortable. And it took me ending that relationship, and this is some of the stuff I explore in the book too. But it took me ending that relationship and starting to learn that, like any community, queer community isn't a monolith, and starting to find people within it who thought my story was a perfectly normal story, a perfectly normal way of being queer. And it's been really healing, but I still don't feel like that I still live very much in a straight world. And I pass as straight. And so it's very tricky. I feel like it's something that I might have a very different answer to this question a couple of years from now.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I often ask this question of writers in the sense of there's such a nervousness, I think, on people who are writers' part to call them, like the moment you actually would be at like a party and you would, if someone asked you what you did, you would say, I'm a writer. Most people say, oh, I teach, or, you know, they would think of, because it just is, for most people, it just sounds, I think there's a fear of sounding pompous or not owning what you do. But for most people, there's a moment where they kind of get okay with that. I wonder, we talked about labels and you say you refer to yourself as queer. When did you kind of feel okay to kind of call yourself that in public with other people? Did it take time to own those labels that you give yourself?
In particular, the word queer, because, you know, like any word that was used as a slur and then is sort of reclaimed by the community that was used against, I felt like I had to earn it somehow. Like I had to earn the right to switch to like get to use it in the positive sense. And so for a long time, I would use this sort of like awkward terminology and say, like, I figured out I'm not straight, which I still do sometimes, because I think that, my partner and I talk about this a lot. My partner was assigned female at birth, but is non-binary. And so it's interesting because I get the really interesting dynamic of after being married to someone who identified as male and was assigned male at birth, and now being married to someone who was raised as a female and now is non-binary. It's so interesting, like seeing what shifts and what doesn't in terms of the way that gender is present in our lives or not present. But I really love being in relationship with someone who it has also really actively like asked a lot of questions of their own identity. I find it I think it feels very affirming for both of us that we both are sort of like getting to figure this out together.
You know, when I was reading the book, I was thinking about that for someone who at, you know, I guess what, you were 36, something around 37, mid to late 30s when this all happened. You know, you'd been living the same way for a long time, whereas your partner had been living in a different way for a long time and had a comfort level with certain things that you didn't. It almost kind of felt like this kind of mentorship and kind of, you know, it's like you kind of like this, it's like a Pygmalion in reverse, this kind of interesting thing of like you're learning how to kind of function while you're also kind of falling in love and doing, there's so many levels of kind of acclimation happening at one time.
And I think it's not uncommon in the queer community for there to be this dynamic, like this learning curve that then, you know, is either an okay thing in a relationship or sets you up with this weird power dynamic. And we don't usually, or at least I didn't experience that in any straight relationships. And maybe it's because we all grow up like steeped in what straight relationships look like, or like how straight people are intimate together, or, you know what I mean? Like there isn't the same welcoming into the fold.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, when, you know, growing up in Oklahoma, and it's funny you mentioned that growing up in the kind of, not that HIV and AIDS has gone away, but, you know, in that period of, say, 1980s up through early 1990s, when it was really on in the headlines almost every day, and it was kind of the plague of our time. Mm. I remember that too. You know, we're about the same age, and there was a negative element attached to that. I think, especially growing up in the middle part of the country, where, you know, there was, if not a direct bias, a inherent danger that people would kind of talk about, like, you know, but I think it does affect how we think about things. And growing up in that very moment definitely played a part in that, where it was like people's negative concepts about sexuality, they had something to kind of reinforce their beliefs with, which was this disease, this, and they would say, well, I'm not against it, but it's just a dangerous lifestyle. You hear that, those kind of words.
And that's why it became all the more important that we could lean on this idea that people are born that way, right. You know, and it isn't just a lifestyle. Right. I still think it's really tricky. You know, I still don't feel that I chose this. Like, I don't think I was born this way, and I don't think I chose this. However, I do think that I changed, and I think that I chose to follow that change rather than not.
You know, you, for lack of a better word, you know, you upended your whole life, not in a, you know, overnight kind of situation. There was, you know, it kind of happened. But you did kind of blow up this pre-existing situation that you had. I wonder, you talk about this moment of, you know, the jury, the summons, being in that courtroom, this moment of love at first sight, for lack of a better word, this kind of attraction that was there. Talk about what would have happened to you if that was not reciprocated, but you still felt the switch being flipped as to say, hey, so I'm feeling something different. Now, there's a good chance that you could have been attracted to a person, they're with somebody else, that wouldn't have worked out, blah, blah, blah. You know, would you have still left your husband and kind of gone down a new path? Was it that much of a awakening?
Yeah. And, you know, in the beginning, I'm glad you asked about that, because in the beginning, I think I hoped that it was just this one person, that like, this was just this weird thing, or maybe I was in this weird position in my life, and this person, like, you know, sort of like awakened this thing in me, but I can go back to normal now. Like when jury duty was over, I told my husband about what I was thinking, and about this crush. And at that point I had one conversation with this defense attorney on the last day of the trial. And it was just like, thank you so much. What's your name? What's your name? And when I told him about this crush, I remember him saying to me, like, why is this such a big deal? Like, why can't this just be a crush? But and I asked myself after that for many months, like, why can't this just be a crush? Like, why can't you just say, no, like, I made this commitment, I'm married, I'm staying here. And so I kind of tried to do this. I didn't think of it at the time as an experiment, but I forced myself to stop looking her up on the internet. And to stop thinking about her, like just to stop driving down the street, looking in the car next to mine to see if like, oh, what if it's her? I forced myself to stop doing that because I think I thought like, you know, the thoughts that you feed are the ones you keep having, right? But what was really telling to me is that I by that point started noticing other women. It really did, like, it felt like she catalyzed some sort of reaction in me, and I couldn't go back to how I had been before. So I think that even if, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but I did wind up dating her, and that's a decent chunk of the book. But even if she had not been open to that, by that point, I was 10 months into trying to make what I felt go away. And I think that I would have had to keep moving forward with what I was learning about myself, whether or not she was interested in me in return. Yeah.
You know, this kind of a life change in a moment when you're, you know, well into your, you know, adulthood is hard enough if it was, you know, just two people, but you had, you know, a child, you had two restaurants that you owned with your husband, all these different things. There were legal entanglements, you know, business entanglements, all these different things. How did you go about untangling that world while trying to keep things sane for your kid?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I tried so many different, I feel like I was helped by so many different things. Number one, I think that I cannot overstate the degree to which the fact that my now ex-husband, my daughter's father, is a really good person. And he was always open to going to therapy with me and on his own. We had gone to therapy earlier in our marriage because right away we started doing really hard things together, like opening businesses and then opening another business. And so, so right away, you know, when this happened to me, we went back to therapy and went to therapy together through the whole process, and have continued every now and then to use therapy as a tool to sort of help us try to stay on the same team. Because I think that what we have done and what we have been trying to do, and what I think I'm only now starting to have language for, is taking the care and the hope that we had for each other as like romantic partners, like the hope that we had for our relationship and the real care that we had for one another. And now we put those into our child. And I think that certainly our lives would be a lot easier if we could just let our connection come to sort of its logical end. But that's not going to happen because we have a child together who we both care deeply about. So yeah, so between, you know, really being clear about the fact that she was our first priority in all of this, that we were both going to remain equally involved in her life, and that we were willing to do the work through therapy and hard conversations to not hate each other, even when our lives, you know, sort of took us in different directions. And then the other thing I would say is, like, I have always, in every stage of my life, have taken tremendous comfort and learned so much from books. And I like ordered every book about divorcing with children that you can find. And the truth is, I sort of cherry picked what I wanted to hear from them. And we wound up doing our own thing, which I write about a little bit in the book. Actually, the way that we talked to her about our divorce and the way that our family was changing was sort of disparaged by some. We tried to make it age appropriate and talk with her about, like, you know, that our family was now going to live in 2 different houses, and we didn't get into talking about it right away as divorce. She wasn't even 4. Like, so yeah. I think reading a lot, and then also trusting my own instincts, even as I was also beating myself up for feeling really sad about changing my daughter's life this way. But yeah, I feel really grateful to her dad and to my now spouse, Ash, who is a really devoted co-parent. And it's really hard sometimes, but all of us are really committed to June, and that feels pretty amazing.
You know, it's so funny, the times that we live in change so much. And I was thinking about this. I used to think that, you know, both of our parents, you know, our parents are boomers, you know, that age, that generation. And, you know, a lot of boomers ended up getting divorced, you know, in like the 70s and 80s. There was a huge uptick of that. And their parents never did, because in some ways it was just not an option for them. And it almost seemed like when I was a kid in school, all my friends' parents were getting divorced all the time. It just seemed like it was just happening all the time. And I think there was that moment where people thought, you know, the trappings of that kind of mid-century lifestyle, where it was like this, the woman was in whatever role she played and the guy was in this role. People started to realize it doesn't have to be that way, but we married people too young and now we're having to get divorced and all these things. It just didn't present itself as an option. Mm-hmm. Well, now we're kind of getting into this period of the world where, you know, we have so many different ways of looking at sexuality and identity and all these different things. It seems overwhelming, I think, to people a lot of times, but it's just the paths that our kids and the younger people will have moving forward. You won't see as many people having to be in a position of being 35 or 45 and having to kind of maybe be presented with an option like this, because it would probably be presented to you as an option much earlier in life, or you wouldn't feel the restraints of just society and those things, maybe even exposure. Is that something you think about much at all?
I mean, so, you know, so the question that I went into the book with, or that I went into writing with, like this question of, like, was I born this way? Is it possible to not be born this way, to change so dramatically? I mean, I did answer the question for the most part in the course of writing the book. Whether or not it was even an interesting question for me to answer by the time I was able to answer it is a whole other thing, because I sort of was like, oh, actually, like, this is much more interesting if we can't really find an answer for this, and if things just get to be messy. But what I'm trying to say, I feel like my brain is, I have a real case of the Mondays, even though it's Monday evening. I feel like I should have it together by now. But no, what I wanted to say is that one of the things that I found so incredibly exciting in the course of writing this book was that it gave me, that the process of writing and the process of entering into writing with all of these questions, like, you know, what is myself? Like, to what degree can a self change and still be the same self? Like, who am I and who gets to decide that? All of these kinds of questions, I set out to try to answer them both by writing and sort of exploring my own story, but also by reading a tremendous amount. And I really wanted to steep myself in the work, in particular of queer writers who came before me, in part because I know I'm not the first person to have this story, and because I feel that I owe a debt to them, but also I hoped they could help me answer some of these questions. And I came upon the research of a person named Lisa Diamond, who wrote a book that came out like 10 years ago called Sexual Fluidity. And I write about it a lot in the book. But what I find so wonderful about it is that she set out to, so she's a psychologist, and she had read all of these studies of sexual orientation and sort of the age at which most people begin to understand or to have a concept of their own sexual orientation. And most of these studies showed that sexual orientation is this like stable, lifelong trait that, like, you know, you sort of figure out when you're an adolescent or at some point, you know, in your growing up, who you're attracted to, and it stays the same. And this is certainly the narrative we've all heard for ages. But what she noticed is that all of these studies were done only on men. And so she set out to do a study where she spoke with women who reported not being straight. And you know, these women sort of fell into many categories, but women in general who did not identify as straight. And she interviewed them multiple times over 10 years, asking them all kinds of things, both about, like, you know, in the beginning, asking about their childhood and when they first, you know, understood their sexual orientation or how they would define it now. She asked them this over a 10-year period. And the defining feature that she found in the way that these women reported their understanding of their sexual orientation was not stability, it was change. And if anything, these women reported not just change, but like an expansion in their understanding of their sexual orientation. So, you know, their understanding of who they could be attracted to broadened over time. And I found myself thinking as I was reading this, I mean, not only was it incredibly soothing to me to be like, wow, this makes so much sense. Like, if we've only based our studies on one portion of the queer population, or like one gender identity in the queer population, like, wow, we've missed so much, like such a variety of information about human experiences of sexual orientation, right? But also I found it so inspiring because it just made me think, like, you know, what if it could be a normal thing that that we expect these things to shift over time? And so maybe we are more open to considering different types of attraction earlier in life, or just what if we didn't expect things to stay the same all of the time? Like, how would that change the choices that we make and the attachments we form and the way that we cope with change if we expect it to a certain degree? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, and I think it speaks to the need of why you needed to read so many books, right? It's like, you know, there's a lot to explore here. And I would imagine, you know, being a writer, you know, you write to explain the world to yourself in a lot of ways, you know, and explain your life to yourself. And that's kind of how you organize the world in a way. I think we all do that, whether we're writing or not. We have little systems that we use to kind of maneuver through the world. You know, one of the things I loved about the book is the title, The Fixed Stars. And for those who don't know, you know, what if the fixed stars are, this is a kind of astronomical concept. I would probably be remiss to explain it, but I'm going to actually read the definition because it says,
yeah,
the fixed stars comprise the background of astronomical objects that appear not to move relative to each other in the night sky compared to the foreground. So it's about perception, right? They appear not to move. They seem as if they're stuck forever, but time plays such a role as we just don't see them moving. So how did you kind of come to that because to me it seemed revelatory when I kind of read that definition when I first picked up the book.
Yeah, it was very organic. And I have a good friend. Well, so when my husband and I first separated, I took on some tasks around the house that previously he had had. And one of those was taking out the dog at night, like right before bed. And it was fall when we separated. And I remember that first fall taking the dog out after dark and being very aware of, I've never been somebody who can recognize a lot of constellations. I'm very much like a Big Dipper and Orion kind of person, like I think most of us are. But I remember, so Orion, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, is primarily visible only in the cold weather months. And so it was fall, and I was starting to see Orion in the sky again as I was taking the dog out at night. And I just, there was something about the consistency, or like the constancy of going out at night and always being able to find Orion. Like, and it was very much on my mind. And at the time I thought like, maybe I'll like learn a lot about astronomy. Like, I'll take up a new hobby.
Why not?
And as I started writing the book a couple years later, as I started looking back on some like little notes that I had kept during the course of our separation, one of the things that jumped out at me that I thought I wanted to spend more time with was this idea of constellations. And throughout the process of writing this book, I worked closely with my good friend Matthew Amster Burton, who is also a writer and who I've hosted a podcast with for a decade now. And Matthew and I would meet up in a coffee shop, and I would work on this book and he would work on his thing. And he was the first person who, when I was talking with him about this theme of constellations, he said, like, are you familiar with the concept of the fixed stars? And he read me the definition, like the idea that, and what I loved about it right away was the idea that, every star, like when it comes into being through whatever explosion or collision of planets or meteors or whatever, when it comes into being, it is set on this course that is intrinsic to like its origin. The metaphors abound, right? Yeah. And yet, because the stars we see in the sky are so far away from us, we don't perceive them as moving, but they are in very clearly measurable ways. And so I loved that in thinking not only about like selfhood and the ways that we change over time, but also in thinking about, the constellations have been used by different civilizations all over the world for thousands and thousands of years. And, used to tell us when to plant crops, or used to record and pass down myths from generation to generation. And I think of like they're an institution almost in the way that marriage is an institution. Like they're this thing that like we use as a shaping force in our lives and as a way of giving our lives like meaning and containment. And so, so it was really, and the more that I read about them, the more that I couldn't believe how well, like thinking about the trajectory of constellations and stars fit what I was learning about the trajectory of like the human self.
Yeah, no, I remember like the first time I heard the concept that, you would see a star and it had maybe died millions of years ago, but the light is just now getting, like that kind of stuff is just unbelievably mind-blowing. But anyway, I digress. I'm curious to know what it's been like for you in quarantine in terms of relationship. Here's why I ask. I've read a million articles, right, that say that this world we're living in these past 6 months is putting relationships to the test and all these different things. You had been married for, how long were you married for? Like 10 years? How long were you married for?
Yeah, I was married to Brandon for actually a little over 10 years by the
Yeah.
time we got divorced.
So you had gone through a lot of ups and downs, all these things, right? This thing has put us into a place where we're, like sardines, we're trapped together. It's going to put anything that had any kind of shakiness to it is going to put that to a further test. I wonder if there were any moments early on after you had left your husband and some of those things where maybe there was an argument or a fight or anything where you did you ever kind of question not your sexuality but the decision to kind of blow up kind of the situation that you had, and what it takes to kind of get past those first hurdles when maybe the romance kind of stops for a moment and the reality of a human relationship begins, and you start feeling the same arguments and problems that any two people together are going to have, if that makes sense.
Will you ask the question part of it again?
Yeah. What what was the first moment when, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to get to the point of where it became mundane enough to have the same problems in a relationship that you always had, no matter if it's a man, a woman, non-binary, whatever, and what that feels like to just kind of settle back down into that, the struggles in some way of relationships. I might not be
You
wording
mean in my current relationship or
yeah.
Yeah. It's so.
Because you have remarried. We have not. Did we? Maybe we did not say that.
I may not have said that. So I remarried. My partner Ash and I got married last November in New York.
Yeah. Forgive me. I should have prefaced with that. I guess my point is, into a new marriage with a completely new situation, when do the kind of norms of married life, whether it's two men, two women, whatever, that start to kind of come back down to normal?
I think for us, the really impactful thing has been that there has been a child in the picture all along, because right away you don't have the same kind of at least for us, real life is very present through all of it from the beginning. So, we moved in, Ash moved into the house that we now live in and that I lived in before, about a year after we met. And when Ash did that, they moved in with not only me, but half time with June, who, Brandon and I have 50-50 custody. So right away, not only was Ash, my partner, this person who I was still in a pretty new relationship with, but now they were also a part-time co-parent and learning how to live with me, learning how to live with our child. And so we have had right up front, like a lot of big life experiences that I don't associate with early relationships or early marriage. And I sometimes feel a lot of grief for that, especially because this is Ash's first marriage, and this is my second marriage. And it's really tricky to uncomplicate things that are really complicated, like having a child.
Yeah.
So, it's been interesting, and I also feel that already our partnership is very, very different from my partnership, from what my partnership ever was with Brandon, and most of that is personal to who Ash is and who Brandon is. But some of it also is the fact of our genders and the way that dramatically changes our everyday lives. Yeah.
We have a kind of a comment, a question from one of our viewers, Larry, who says, gay has become a much more broadly accepted term and concept in the last 60 years. This is kind of something we touched on a little bit already, but saying, had the author's crush taken place 65 years ago with this strong female defense attorney, would it have been suppressed due to the times? I mean, that's fairly obvious to say probably so. 65 years ago was a much different world, but what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard for me to say, but I cannot tell you how many times I have marveled at my luck to live in the time that I do, and also to live in a a city with a strong gay community where I have gotten to come out for the most part with next to no friction. And I cannot even imagine having had the fortitude to do that in another era. Yeah, I mean, between the stigma of same-sex relationships in that era and the stigma of divorce in that era, I mean, that is powerful. I mean, I think the stigma of divorce, and divorce isn't stigmatized now by in any, like, it doesn't even compare to what it used to be.
Isn't that that's a good sign, right? That's
I believe that's a good sign, because I don't think shaming people into staying married is the way to prevent divorce.
No.
But I do think that the stigma around all of it, I think that the few people we do hear about who were openly queer and writing about it, and to whom we owe our ability to be out now, my God, like, I don't know if I would have been as strong as they were.
Yeah, and so many of them moved to Europe, you know, right?
True. It's true.
Yeah. So another question from Rosalie, who says, I think what you said about expecting change to happen over a lifetime is so interesting. What do you think could be in place for our society to make that type of change easier or more expected?
Wow. God, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that there are certain aspects of our lives in which it is so normalized, right? I mean, we've all gotten accustomed to the idea that at least for people in my generation and younger generations, like, I think we all expect to have many careers now over a lifetime. Like, this kind of change has happened, or this embracing of change and like evolution over a person's lifetime has already shifted so much from like my parents' generation. And I think too about the way that we talk about parenthood also, now that it is much more the norm to have children into your 30s, or even up to age 40, or even beyond that for some people. I think that there is more of an acceptance of the idea that you can live many lifetimes within one. Or, you know, it's like, I was saying to someone last week.
You contain multitudes, right?
I was saying to someone last week, like, nobody seems to think it was strange that I, until the time that I was 32, felt pretty adamantly that I did not want to be a mother. Just wasn't something I was interested in. And then, like, a switch flipped in me, and I thought, actually, this is an experience that I want to have. I want to know what it is to, like, be a parent. I want this relationship. And I was lucky enough to be able to have a child. But nobody would say, whoa, that's weird, or like, clearly you've lost your mind. You went through a midlife crisis and decided to have a child at the age of 32. But we do say that about sexual orientation, or all kinds of things, or you know, about people.
If you flip it, actually, you know, the idea that if you had decided you never wanted to have kids, that's more stigmatized than the opposite, right? People might be like, well, why not? Don't you want to experience what that's, you know? So there are still some of those vestiges of like the kind of, I guess, the patriarchy in a certain way, kind of, you know, hanging over all these things.
Yeah, but I think in general, and maybe part of the reason why we are so divided as a country right now is that all this change is happening so fast, like this progressive social change. And I hope that it will continue, because I don't think that there is anything that social policy or religion can really do to change who people are. And
you know, you often hear that phrase, right? The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. That's kind of a more social justice idea, but the kind of concept of the lowercase l liberalization of our culture, you know, is the same kind of thing, right? It seems like there's these fits and starts where you'll see that, like when you think about even Ellen, you know, going on TV 20 some odd years ago, I think Ellen's been canceled. I don't know where we are on Ellen, but
when Ellen came out in like 1997.
But think about where we are now, you know.
Yeah.
And it took another 10, like it wasn't like it accelerated then. I mean, you can look probably back to like 2008 when Barack Obama becomes president. He's against gay marriage in 2008, right? He's for it, you know, just a year or two later. And so the speed of change, yeah, is it's sometimes very disheartening in a way because it takes so long. But when you see those accelerated moments, you do feel some hope that sometimes things can kind of come together and ignite some fire beyond.
Well, and I would say that, like, I think, you know, part of the reason that I wrote this book is because I didn't know anyone in my life who had had this experience. And now that I've been engaged in the process of writing and publishing this book, I have met so many people whose experience of their sexual orientation is not linear, is expansive, is something that has changed for them. I think that, it's the kind of thing where, the more you talk about it, the more we all feel safe to talk about it or say, oh yeah, my aunt did that or whatever. And then it becomes no longer, I hope over time that we will just, we will have more nuance in the way that we talk about sexual orientation.
Yeah, that's like humanity's way of, like, when you buy a new car and all of a sudden you realize everybody has the same car that you do. It's like you're just not looking before that moment.
Yes.
So that actually touches on a good question from Maggie, one of our viewers, who says, has coming to queerness affected your craft as a writer? And are there ways in this book that it feels newly queer to you in terms of your language or structure?
Oh, God, I love that question. Well, it certainly made me feel freer. I think also, well, so you know, I got started as a writer in food writing. And I think that both because I was in food writing and because I started out as a blogger, I think that I felt a tremendous amount of pressure. So food writing is often not taken very seriously, despite the fact that there is some incredible writing about food and some incredible journalism about food, now more than ever. But I felt a tremendous amount of pressure in my early career, and for a lot of my career, to have my writing be literally and figuratively palatable, to have it be appealing, and if I was going to be clever or sarcastic or anything that wasn't cute, I still wanted it to be likable. And I'm still a tremendous people pleaser. I will probably go to my grave struggling with this. However, going through the experience of coming out well into adulthood as a mother and as a married woman in a straight community, I feel like the experience of having to be or allow myself to be unlikable, or what I believed was unlikable, I feel like it had a freeing effect on me as a writer, or as someone with a brain who liked to read things. I feel, I feel, yeah, I just, it made me feel less afraid. And it was an interesting process, like trying to place this book with a publisher and with an editor, because, you know, like, especially, you know, publishing is a capitalist enterprise, like any other, and people want you to keep doing what you've done before. But I have to say that it felt so wonderful to get to work with, I have an editor who, many times I wrote to him and said, this book is really queer. Like, I just want to make sure you understand what I'm going to deliver to you. Like, I'm really going for it here and doing exactly what I want to do. And he never wavered for a second. And I just, I feel so grateful for having discovered in myself the willingness to fight for myself that I found through going through the experience of separating and changing my life. And then that I got to work with someone who really encouraged me to bring that experience in all of its messiness to the page. I think what's most, I think like a defining feature of queerness is a testing of boundaries and an interrogation of what is going to be normal life for me as a person. And I feel like I got to put that into the book, both in its structure and in its content. And yeah, it changed me.
Before we wrap up, I've got a couple of questions left, but I just want to remind everybody that if you haven't gotten a copy of The Fixed Stars, please do so. We've put links here in the chat several times to get the book. We'd love to have you get it through Magic City Books and support what we're doing. And I think if we do that, we can make Molly's book. We now have this Oklahoma bestsellers list, which we put out every week. And now I think we can make this #1 on that list. If we all
make it happen for me, guys.
Yeah. I mean, Molly is an Oklahoman. I mean, it just has to happen. Let's make this happen, okay?
You also have signed copies.
Yes. We have signed books, and we'll get those to you as well to sweeten the pot. Not that you should need that; you should just want the book. But we will do that. I want to say just a couple of final questions. Let's talk about reading for a second and just lighten our conversation up a little bit. Have you been reading a ton during quarantine? I know you're an avid reader, but have you found the time to do that? Are you deep diving into escapist kind of stuff, or are you, what are you into right now?
So early in quarantine, I joined into like a group of people on the internet who were reading War and Peace.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this was put out by the Public Space, a great literary magazine, which we've done some stuff with before.
Yeah. No, it was really cool. I made it only 800 words in.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to say 800 pages. I was like, you should have just finished the thing.
No, I'm sorry, 800 pages. God, what am I saying? 800 words?
Yeah, that's like the first page. Yeah.
I made it only 800 pages in.
Well, that's like getting almost to the end. Come on.
It is. It's like 2/3 of the way through. I think it's like 1250 or something. Anyway, I want to finish it by the time COVID is over. And I don't know what that means about me, because COVID might be over a long time from now. But anyway, I'm keeping up hopes that.
Based on that pacing, I'm hoping that COVID is over before you're done with it, actually.
Yeah, okay.
I'm rooting for us, yeah, on that.
Okay.
One. What else?
But what I most recently read, since I have put down War and Peace a while ago, I have been reading a lot of fiction in lockdown. And last week I just finished The Death of Vivek Oji by Akwaeke Emezi, I think. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right. But anyway, that book was incredible. So yeah, The Death of Vivek Oji. I just picked up Zadie Smith's newest collection of essays.
Which is kind of interesting. I saw that come out. I'm a big fan of hers too, because she just had an essay collection come out, I don't know, a year ago called Feel Free, I think is what it was called.
Yes.
And this is a new one that came out as a paperback original. I don't know if it came out maybe in England, maybe it came out in a different way, but I had not even heard it was coming out. It seemed like it just kind of appeared all of a sudden.
Yeah, I saw it in a bookstore and was like, what is this?
So, you're in Seattle, so people may not know that, but you're in Seattle. You've been in Seattle for a long time. You have some wonderful bookstores there. Probably the most famous being Elliott Bay Books is probably the most famous bookstore there, but a lot of other great bookstores too. What's it been like, kind of, are they okay? Have you kind of been checking in with them? Are they figuring out how to kind of make it through this weird moment?
Yeah, so I imagine you guys are doing this too, but they're doing like curbside pickup,
Yeah.
which is so so actually I have a wonderful, really small bookstore in my neighborhood called Secret Garden Books, and they do curbside pickup. And so I have been ordering all my books from them, and it's so easy. I can like stop on the way to the grocery store. In fact, I was just talking with Ash recently about how it's sort of the opposite of what I would have thought would happen in lockdown. We have found that like local businesses are adapting in ways that make them much easier and faster to buy from than like ordering something online. I mean, and not only do we get to support small businesses, but I mean, I can call Secret Garden today and ask them if they have a book, and I can stop there in 15 minutes and pick it up.
And you live in the land of Amazon. You live literally in the land of Amazon.
Yes.
So I've just read this for the first time. Let me see if I have it here. This is, you talked about food writing. This is
Oh yeah.
Jim Harrison, Really Big Lunch. This is a bunch of different things. People who may not know Jim Harrison, probably most famous for writing Legends of the Fall, probably. But one of the great kind of, I don't know, hedonists of our time, and just kind of live life to the craziest extent. And I would recommend that. I've been missing going to restaurants so much and stuff, that it's been nice to kind of at least read about people going to them and experiencing that kind of communal world that we miss so much. Well, let me ask you one final question about books, which is, how old is your daughter now?
She is going into second grade. She's almost 8.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you've had a chance to kind of, this is kind of an interesting period. We're starting to transition into, a different type of book. If you're starting to get to introduce some classics and some other books that you loved as a kid for the first time to her, and what that's been like.
Yeah, it's interesting because the books, I don't remember what I was reading in particular at like this age in second grade. I remember things that I read when I was older, like I can't wait to introduce her to the Phantom Toll Booth.
Yeah.
But I think she's still like, I think she's still
a year or two away from that, couple of years away. Yeah.
Yeah. She's just gotten really into the new Babysitters Club series, the graphic novel one with Raina Telgemeier.
Yeah.
And that's been really cool, like to have her, referencing.
Did you read those? Did you read the original?
Oh, yeah, I read all the original ones. Yeah. So it's been so fun to have her talking about like Dawn or Christy or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's been great. But then I've been finding things, actually with help from our local bookstore, books that are new to me and that are amazing. Like, are you familiar with The War That Saved My Life?
No.
Oh my gosh, the author is Kimberly Brubaker Brown or something like that. Kimberly and Brubaker are correct. I'm not sure about the last one. But anyway, The War That Saved My Life.
Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
It is incredible.
Yeah.
So amazing.
Won a Newbery Award, just for not that,
It's just no big deal.
No big deal.
Anyway, and it has a sequel called The War I Finally Won, which we're now reading. So that's been really exciting to find books that are, I think I hadn't realized how many not so great books there are for kids.
Well, when you say we're reading, do you read them together out loud, or are you reading just to kind of vet it, or what do you mean by we?
So the War That Saved My Life is a bit above her reading and comprehension level at the moment. So that one we read together as a family. The Raina Telgemeier books, she's able to read on her own. She's just gotten into Dog Man. She can do that on her
Oh,
own.
Dog Man. Yeah, I love Dog
Yeah.
Man.
Oh, she's
Well,
constantly reading me passages out of Dog Man.
we were just about to open the bookstore, and we did an event with Dave Pilkey, who did Dog Man and Captain Underpants, and he did this amazing thing. We were kind of getting ready to open, and all out of nowhere, he sent us a check for like $10,000 or something, just to give us, to help us what we were doing, and became kind of a founding donor. He lives in Japan, I think, most of the time, but totally out of nowhere. It
Oh
was
my
like
God,
the
that's
most amazing thing.
incredible.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. So we're big fans of Dog Man for sure. But I want to say a big thank you to you for taking time to chat with us. I hope everyone will take time to get a copy of The Fixed Stars and read it. I think it's been really cool to kind of see not just where you've gone, but I really have seen a cool evolution of your writing, but you still retain. You talked about not wanting to try to squeeze like fun and all these things, but this is really for the heaviness of all you're trying to squeeze in here, there's a breeziness to it that only happens with good writing. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. That means so much to me. Thank
Yeah.
you.
But I hope you guys will get the book, enjoy it. We'll see you guys next time. Want to say thank you to Molly for joining us, and we hope you stay safe, and we'll see you very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
All right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you. Bye.